The Forgotten War. Why Two Sisters Created an Organization to Push for Change. By Janice Gassam Asari. For the last 2 years, Ethiopia has been at war with itself. The conflict, which began in November of 2020, is with the Ethiopian military and troops from Eritrea, who have been fighting with the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF. For months leading up to November of 2020, there were tensions between Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and regional forces in Tigray. In September 2020, after Tigrayans held their own regional parliamentary elections, the decision was made to cut funding for TPLF leadership, which increased hostilities and eventually escalated to a full-blown conflict, the Ethiopian Tigray War. Hawzien and Maebel started a non-profit organization, Tigray Action Committee, to raise awareness about the war, which many are calling a genocide. The sisters sat down to discuss how they've been impacted, the weight of generational trauma, and why it's so important to have conversations about these experiences in the workplace. Janice Gassam Asari. It's wonderful to chat with you both. Could you just briefly explain who you are for the Forbes readers that are not familiar? Hawzien Gebremedin. Yes, I'll go first. I'm a lot of different things. I'm a mother. I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion practitioner at an accounting firm. I am a co-founder and a Tigray American citizen. Maebel Gebremedin. I'm Hawzien's older sister. I'm also Tigrayan American. I am a woman and I strongly believe in women's abilities and capabilities. Being Tigrayan is my reason for everything that I do. I'm a mother of 3 boys and I'm very, very proud of them. I'm proud to be a mother of boys. I'm also very proud to be Black. Asari. I think it's really interesting that both of you identify as Tigrayan versus Ethiopian. Could you explain a little bit more about that for those who are not familiar with what it means to be Tigrayan? Hawzien Gebremedin. Tigray is a region in North Ethiopia. I would consider myself Ethiopian up to November of 2020. That is when the genocide on Tigray really went full force. Before that, I identified as being an Ethiopian American who was of Tigrayan ethnicity. But when the war and genocide started, it was very clear that the Ethiopian identity that I once identified with was no longer one that I believed in and could support, because the Ethiopian government was killing Tigrayans, killing citizens that lived in Tigray. How can I identify with this country that is intent on exterminating the population that I identify with? Asari. For the readers who are not familiar with what is happening in Ethiopia, could you each go into more detail about what is happening? Maebel Gebremedin. Tigray is a part of Ethiopia. It's the most northern region of Ethiopia. It's sandwiched between Eritrea to the north and Amhara and other regions to the south. It also shares a border with Sudan on one side and Afar on the other. It's a landlocked area within Ethiopia, and it is in the midst of a genocide that's being perpetrated by the Ethiopian government. The Ethiopian government essentially has invited neighboring Eritrea to come in and massacre Ethiopian citizens, Tigrayans. They have used rape as a weapon of war. They've used starvation as a weapon of war. They've closed every border so Tigrayans are trapped within Tigray. They can't go to Sudan any longer. They can't go to anywhere essentially. Hawzien Gebremedin. Hundreds of thousands of women have been raped. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. Ghent University out of Belgium does these studies to try to determine how many people have died. Their latest report said 600,000 people have been killed, and those are just civilians. So that does not include anyone in the army, the militaries that are fighting. Like Maebel said, we have Tigray in the north, the rest of Ethiopia's to the south, and Eritrea's at the top. The Eritrean and the Ethiopian allied government, because Ethiopia has a federal government and they have these allied forces that aren't part of the federal government that are also attacking Tigray. What has changed right now is that prior to August, there was a 5-month ceasefire where there was no fighting, but Tigray was under siege. There was no food or medicine getting in at all to the region. so hundreds of thousands of people were dying due to starvation. Sorry. Could you go into a little bit of detail about the organization that you and your sister have created and what the purpose of the organization is? Hawzien Gabremidin. On Martin Luther King Day in Denver, we have an award ceremony and I was watching the award ceremony and a woman won an award, the highest award of the night, for her work against genocide. I was sitting there thinking, if this woman could do something, I could do something. Why can't I do something to try to help end this? So, we got together. We said, let's create a little committee and call it ourselves Tigrai Action Committee. There was 5 of us and we just started meeting with legislators. That turned into the nonprofit that we have today, Tigrai Action Committee. We have the saying, me and Maebel, if not me, then who? And we really live by that. We said, if the world isn't going to save our families, we have to do something to save our families. Maebel Gabremidin. Hawzien and I were born in refugee camps when we came to the United States as children. That has affected the way we view the world. We are immigrants essentially. The way that this has affected us has been traumatic on different levels because our father essentially went through the refugee camp, moved to the United States, became a citizen, moved back out of retirement, and has been trapped there. So, we're watching so many different ways that this has affected everybody. Hawzien Gabremidin. You have this piece, Dr. Janice, about generational trauma that I was reading and that's exactly what happened with us. In Tigray, what happened 35 years ago was the same kind of thing when there was a genocide happening against the people of Tigray. Our parents fled that area, went to Sudan, like Maebel mentioned, the same kind of refugee transition and then we were born in the refugee camps. 30 years later, we're seeing the same exact thing that happened to our families happen again. Maebel wrote a piece for The Cut where she talks about this generational trauma. Sorry. How do you go to work and navigate what's going on knowing that much of your family is still over there? What's happening in Ethiopia isn't on the main stage like what's happening in Ukraine. People aren't even aware that this is taking place, so what sort of impact do you think it has had on you? Hawzien Gabremidin. When George Floyd died, there was an article that came out and it was called, Maintaining Professionalism in the Age of Black Death. It was so impactful to me as an employee, as someone that cares about DEI. I sent it to my whole management team. It gives me chills to think about when George Floyd died and we all had to go back to work and just assume like this was business as usual. It's exactly how it's felt for the past 2 years. We see our families be bombed every day. We see our families starving and not knowing what to do to support them, and then I'm expected to go to work and be professional and do the things I have to do. People are scared to talk about this kind of stuff at work. But if we're going to be honest and inclusive and diverse in our thinking and equitable in the things that people need, then we need to be able to show up as our full selves and talk about these things. Sorry. What can readers do to help with this issue and raise more awareness? Maebel Gabremidin. This is actually very much an American issue. There are Americans that are trapped in Tigray, American citizens, our father. The United States is the #1 aid provider to Ethiopia. They have tried to give aid to Ethiopia. Almost right under $1 billion of aid has gone to Ethiopia, and that is American taxpayers who are paying for that to happen. But what that aid is doing is just sitting on trucks. It's rotting. It's expiring because the Ethiopian government refuses to give it. Instead, they will just let it sit and be a part of a blockade. This is an American issue. I want Americans to realize that very much. This affects their everyday life and they're not even understanding that. But the thing that they can do right now is pressure the government to do something about it. You can email your legislator. You can give your legislator a phone call. You can send a letter. There's multiple things that people can do within their power. We've already written the script for you. We've already written the email for you. We've already written the letter. It's just a couple clicks. You don't even have to find a legislator. We've made that easy for you too. Just put in your zip code. We've done all the hard work. It's a very easy way to support Tigray, to make sure that Tigray can survive to see another day and that there's a future for Tigray.